Welcome to the Back in Business podcast. I'm Mickey Clark and I've been broadcasting and writing for best part of 40 odd years.
And I'm Liz Barclay and I've been broadcasting and writing about business for about half of the time that Mickey Clark has.
Cheeky muppet.
Great to see you on Zoom, Mickey.
Yeah, poor repair, but you're getting there. We're a team of business journalists, small business people, and freelance contractors who are back in business and aiming to help others, particularly enterprising young people, get back in business.
And we believe that small businesses and freelancers are the backbone of the UK economy and that more needs to be done to help the approximately 6 million of us out there. And we want to hear from you, your stories, your experiences, the truth about your business or your contracts and how you're coping with the virus outbreak.
You'll find much more on our website, backinbusiness.org.uk. Join us and tell us your stories. It's the stories that count, stick, and make the important points.
Email us at contact@backinbusiness.org.uk, and that's backin, BACKIN, business, all one word, no G. Visit the website, find us on LinkedIn, or we're on Twitter at business_backin. Mickey, what do you think of the events of this week? We've had the bounce back loans, and obviously they're extremely important for small businesses. They do seem to be. They seem to be working, do they not?
I think they are. They seem to be. There seemed to be this belief when it first started, particularly with Rishi Sunak, that it was going to be a one-size-fits-all situation, which of course it isn't, because each business is different and identifiable in that way. So the original C-bills, basically, they weren't going to suit everybody. In fact, many people got turned away by the banks. I mean, the worst people in the world to go to get a loan is a bank, even though it's not their money. So I think this new one...
Where would you have gone instead?
Probably ask my mum and dad or something. I mean, it's needs must, basically. But certainly the bounce back loans, I think, are better able to suit people's demands, particularly with small businesses and those companies that are employing one or two people. And let's remember, it's those companies that make up the backbone of our economy. It's not the Vodafones and the ICIs, whatever they call themselves these days. It's the small businesses. So yeah, it's working. Let's hope that there's enough there and that people find they're flexible enough to get them back when the recovery takes place.
Well, there was also all that business about the furlough scheme, and winding it down. If it does get wound down too soon, we're going to see an awful lot of people who are, made redundant, ending up on universal credit.
Well, I think a lot of people are being made redundant, and I think there are going to be a lot of businesses that basically won't be there when the lockdown ends. It's as simple as that. You look at the pubs industry, the entertainment industry that we talked about last week, that isn't going to come out anytime soon for health reasons, and it's going to be the politicians and the scientists that dictate the pace of this, not us. And that's a problem. But I think if they can keep businesses informed, then so much the better. At least they'll be able to deal with it. But at the moment, we've seen some pretty big companies out there, General Electric, Airbus, Marks and Spencer, all saying, look, we're not going to suffer this again. We're going to take action. We're going to take action now. And of course, what that basically means is we're going to make people redundant. And it's always the workforce that suffers first.
Well, I've been talking to a lot of people who run hotels, people in tourism, people around the country who are desperately concerned that if they can't furlough their staff, they've simply got no choice but to let them go. And that means...
Yeah, cut costs. I mean, any business can cut costs. I always used to say any fool can cut costs on a business. It takes a real talent to actually grow a business. But, you can understand businesses at the moment that are out there. They've had 3 years of uncertainty with Brexit, and that's still rumbling on. But it pales into insignificance now about the backdrop of what's been going on with the economy and with businesses themselves. And I think that's something that we've all got a steep learning curve to establish.
Well, I'm sure Declan Curry, our business editor, will be able to tell us more about what's been going on this week. And we also have a businessman with us who applied for a bounce back loan this week. So we'll hear a lot more about that in a minute or two. But in the meantime, I had the chance to talk to the Shadow Chancellor. Now, Anneliese Dodds is not perhaps a household name as yet, but she's in the Shadow Chancellor's seat. And her leader, Keir Starmer, had called this week for a national consensus on dealing with COVID-19 in the UK. So I asked her what she thought he would like that consensus to cover.
Yeah, so I think particularly from the economic side, we need to ensure that there's confidence, obviously within businesses, but also amongst employees and consumers about how we move out of lockdown as and when the decision is taken to do that. Obviously, a critical element of that is going to be around ensuring that safety guidelines are well understood, that they're encompassing of the different situations people find themselves at work, and that there's a process for people to use if they feel their workplace may be unsafe, or if they feel a business they're using is operating in an unsafe way. That confidence, I think, can only be built through consensus. Obviously, we're saying it needs to be across parties, but it needs to be also across business, across trade union movement as well. If we don't have that, then we could potentially have much smaller numbers of people willing to go back to work, people worried about using different businesses, going into different workplaces. That will hamper our recovery. So I suppose that the kind of element of it that I'm dealing with, particularly around the economic side, is around, yes, having consensus around the safe working practices that we'll need for the future. But, where possible, we should have it in other areas as well, because, of course, this is a national effort and it's something that we're all affected by.
When it comes to confidence in safety, the furlough scheme obviously has been extremely important in allowing people to keep their employees on, have the confidence that they will have those employees coming back to that workplace. But the Chancellor is looking at ways of winding this down in July. Now, if it isn't extended, either people will go back to work when they feel they're not safe enough to do so, or employers will drop them onto the unemployment at the mercy of universal credit, and the unemployment figures will soar. How confident are you that this won't happen?
Well, I think we have to somehow ensure that it doesn't. It's absolutely critical. A kind of nightmare scenario, to my mind, would be that scheme ending on the same date for a very large proportion of the working population. Now, of course, millions of people are on the furlough currently. Many of them may well be able to go straight back into their jobs, depending on the health of the economy and the lockdown arrangements. But a large number won't be able to go back in the same way. Now, to simply say that the furlough scheme will be cut off or will be radically scaled back without any longer term perspective and support put in, both for businesses and employees, is going to be immensely damaging, because we'll suddenly have a big bump in unemployment, very large numbers of people with similar skills going into the labour market at the same time with no opportunities, and it will be regionally concentrated as well, and concentrated in particular places. So we must avoid that outcome. I think that means looking at what other countries are doing in particular. Now, I accept the furlough scheme was very different for the UK. We've never had anything like it before. So it was difficult to set up, and it's quite clunky, but ultimately I accept that was partly because it was set up at speed. But we've got to facilitate short hour working within the furlough scheme so that employees can have a relationship with the workplace. They can be doing some of that development work now, if at all possible, 30% or whatever it is, so that they can then still have actually a job to come back to. Because if businesses aren't kept going, then there just won't be the work for them to go back to full time. So we're really saying to the Chancellor, please look at this. Stop looking at it just as, well, I'm not saying he's necessarily just been doing this or anybody else has, but don't look at it just as a way of banking people. Look at it as a tool for hopefully reintegrating people back into the workplace, there will need to be some restructuring eventually as well, but how can that be done in a way that doesn't increase unemployment? So that's the kind of thing that we're pushing on really around the furlough scheme.
I can understand, though, that the costs are spiralling, and there is the bigger question in the longer term of where that money comes from, how we repay borrowing, etc., etc. So we understand that it's not that easy. But you mentioned it being a bit clunky. Something else that's been extremely clunky is the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. And now on Monday we've had the bounce back scheme launched. That went live, up to £50,000 for eligible small businesses. Has the money been getting through any better? Do the banks really have the capacity?
Yeah, well, obviously we pushed for something like the bounce back loan scheme because we were very worried by the statistics. Again, in comparison to other countries, it looked like the UK was being a lot slower at getting that financial support out there to small businesses. So we were urging, for example, 100% guarantee for quite some time before government said they'd be willing to apply that to the bounce back scheme. We don't yet have the data on how well it's working. That is another area actually that we've been trying to encourage government to be more open around, because unless we have timely information, obviously we can't identify where the blockages are. Government themselves seem to be confident that support will be getting out there, but we really need to make sure that it is there. I think allied to that, there then also needs to be more business support generally. I mean, again, this is something that over recent years there's not been so much of as we would have liked, but that's going to be quite critical, I think, for a lot of firms, that particularly those that aren't used to taking on debt, and there'll be quite a large number of them at the smaller end in particular. And then I would just mention that actually for many manufacturers, there are quite significant issues with the different schemes, with CL bills as well. Things like invoice financing, for example, very, very common in manufacturing, but seem to be impeding accessing funds through these different loan schemes. That needs to be sorted out. There seems to be a difference between what's on paper and what's being implemented, that obviously we're pushing on.
What are you hearing from your constituents? Who do you think is falling through the cracks? And what are you saying to them? Because it's very difficult to be reassuring to small businesses and freelancers, for instance, who are not used to taking on the risk of loans, who are not used to getting into debt, who run on very tight margins and are really anxious about the future.
I mean, it is an incredibly difficult situation, and my own father was a small businessman. He set up his own firm and worked very hard on it for a very, very long time. And I think the kinds of difficult decisions that people are faced with currently are really heartbreaking. People have put their heart and soul into their business, and now they're thinking, well, is this still going to be running this time next year, or even on a shorter time frame than that? So I think this is a very, very difficult time. I think we need to do all that we can to try and preserve that capacity in the economy. A number of measures have been put in. I suppose my concern has been that the implementation hasn't always been there, such that the funds have then got to where they need to be. Particular issue, obviously, I know for lots of small businesses that aren't business rateable, or where there's a complex system for the business rates being paid. And I think you're right. I think those falling through the gaps are finding it very, very difficult. But I guess just allied to that, the kind of context for all of this for individuals is that if you don't qualify to access help through any of the schemes that have been set up, the alternative is, as you mentioned, universal credit. Now, that is an extremely low rate of income replacement for the vast majority of people. Traditionally it's about 10% of average incomes that you'd be getting on universal credit. So it's catastrophic if you fall down onto that. So I think that's why this is a particular issue in the UK, again, compared to lots of other countries that have got more sensible approaches to income protection when people become unemployed.
But we're heading, as we've talked about, to a huge number of people who are unemployed. And we've also heard today about the fact we're probably going to see another 600,000 under 25s, graduates and school leavers going on to the dole, as we might have called it, because there are no opportunities for them. And yet we're putting them into a system of universal credit that is basically a broken system. This will do long-term damage.
Yeah, I think it really will do. And I think here we need to have as an imaginative an approach as possible. We need to look at what's working in other countries and what hasn't worked in our own. If you think about some of the big dislocations that we've had in the past, 1980s, deindustrialization, what happened in the pit towns, etc. We know what didn't work there. We've had other schemes since, like Future Jobs Fund and others, New Deal, etc. Now, they've all been controversial, but we need to pick the kind of positive aspects of that employment support and really turbocharge it, actually. I think empower regions as well and local government to be doing all they can around industrial coordination and around employment activation. We're always told that, if we're leaving the EU, then all the structural funds money will suddenly be made available. We still don't have any plans about how that's going to be used. And traditionally that was used to help in these kinds of circumstances. So I think we've got to be kind of looking outside the box on a lot of this. And I think it's very interesting, comparing our unemployment levels, even now, how quickly unemployment has increased in the UK compared to some other countries. Again, it's gone up really quite a bit. So there's an issue about, in kind of how willing companies are to keep hold of people. That's something that we've got to look at, I think, for the future.
And you alluded to it. I didn't necessarily want to throw Brexit into the mix, but isn't that perhaps one step too far at the moment?
Well, what I've been trying to say when I've been having these discussions with those on the government side is just to think through particularly the implications of a no-deal Brexit. I think that's the major worry that so many have, because if we have additional trade barriers being placed on top of the really severe pressures that we've had on lots of supply chains in different industries, obviously, quite significantly reduced demand in a lot of other areas as well. If we have extra trade barriers on top of that, that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. In the case of many, many businesses, some larger firms might be able to weather it, possibly, especially if they've got access to other lines of finance, a bit like the impact of this current crisis. They can perhaps deal with that and alter things. But for smaller companies, it will be really, really tough. So I think that awareness has got to be there. And my concern is that ideology could be kind of trumping a really cold, hard look at national interest in this case. I accept that people voted to leave the EU. Obviously, I accept that Labour lost the last election and that is completely understood. But I can't see currently the evidence that we've got that strong engagement to prevent particularly a no-deal Brexit. And I worry for British business as a result of that.
I would suggest that the country was in a pretty poor shape. We have low wages, lack of wage recovery since 2008. Despite high employment, we've got lots of people in part-time jobs and in the gig economy, a quarter of people going into this particular crisis with less than £100 in savings. We need a different response to the crisis. We need to create somehow or other a fairer society, and small businesses and the freelance sector, I think, feel that they have been left out of that conversation. How do we get a different conversation?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical, and I think there are tensions around this because so many of us are desperate to get back to normal. We're desperate to be back to where we were before, but ultimately, exactly as you say, we can't have a situation where our labour market, our economy, and indeed our public services are so lacking in resilience that we can find it so difficult to deal with this kind of an event, and it can have such a catastrophic impact on so many people's living standards. So we will have to change. I think there will be change coming, it sounds like, from the government side, because they've said that the quid pro quo for the self-employed income support package is going to be a different tax system. Now, okay, that may come, and obviously we'll scrutinise that, but what we will be saying is you can't do that without recognising the insecurity that exists around so much self-employment. Therefore, you need to be thinking about how you can really bolster people's incomes and their working security, make sure that they have those protections there, do that in a modern way, obviously making use of the kind of different platforms that are now available as well for lots of self-employed people. But I mean, I suppose I also think it's really critical that we look at some of the competition policy issues. Now, these are coming up also because of the technological change that we're seeing, and it's really important that small businesses, I think, and freelancers are involved in that conversation as well, because we see how actually having that kind of smaller input can help to promote resilience in some of the really critical areas, around kind of remote working and all that kind of thing that is going to become, I think, the new normal for a lot of people into the future.
We stand ready when the phone call comes. We will be there and we will help in that conversation. You asked on the 27th of April that the Chancellor worked with you, the unions, the businesses, the local authorities, all work together to develop a plan. Has there been a response? And if the response was yes, then we want to be at the table.
Oh, brilliant! Well, I'm really pleased to hear that. I haven't had an explicit response on that call. I am grateful to the Chancellor that he wrote back to me around some of the other issues that were raised in my letter. And obviously, I've been trying to raise with him, in fact, a number of things that we've talked about in this interview around the gaps in provision and concerns about access to support, etc. But I think we need to have that conversation. I mean, you look at the furlough scheme, that came about because businesses were calling for it, because the trade unions were calling for it, obviously opposition parties as well. And, I think the government recognised eventually, right, we do need to do this and work together to get it set up. I think we need to have that kind of an approach when it comes to, as I said before, the return to work, making sure that's safe, that it's understood by everybody, that there's confidence in it when the medical time is right. And then also some of the forward-looking measures that we're going to need to put in place. Ultimately also, because we will be in a difficult fiscal position, we need to make sure that there is that kind of national consensus around the steps forward where we can build it. I think that's going to be really important.
Anneliese Dodds, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So, thank you very much to the Shadow Chancellor for talking to me earlier on this week. It's a bit hard to get perfect sound, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, because we're all using Zoom and sometimes broadband does seem to dip in and out. We're hoping to get the Chancellor as soon as he's got free 10 minutes. But in the meantime, we've got Declan Curry, our business editor, and Simon McVicker, our Director of Public Affairs, joining Mickey and me. What did you think of what she had to say?
Well,
Simon?
I think she's probably glad she's not the Chancellor at the moment, because I think this is such an unprecedented, immense crisis we're in at the moment, that I don't think that politicians really have a watertight plan for what to do. And I think there's a lot of wishful thinking and finger crossing. But I think the problem that she didn't answer, and it's a problem that's been asked on the Tory backbenches more and more, is if we continue with this lockdown, which seems as if we are going to, and this is going to go on to the end of May, how on earth is the country going to afford it? And how on earth can we get the economy back on its legs again and start generating income? And there's no answers around that. And if we don't get it up and running soon, then we are really looking at economic catastrophe ahead.
Declan?
But what is the economic catastrophe if we lift the lockdown too early and then there's a massive second wave of infections? It's a balance, Simon, this, isn't it, between the economic risks and the health risks, and the two can't really be separated. They are intertwined.
Well, I'm not sure that that's necessarily true, because if you look at the death rates, for instance, there's hardly any a couple of hundred, maybe under 40-year-olds have died in this crisis. And really, is it really worth closing down the whole economy to protect maybe the elderly people when the younger people are, at most, they may get a sort of flu-like symptoms, but at best they're going to be completely robust. And this is their future we're talking about. This is their economy we're looking at.
I think we all share the concerns, Simon, without question. It's, as I said, I think it's the politicians and the scientists that are going to lead us out of this, and I don't envy them the task. But I suppose what worries me most about the proposals put in place by Rishi Sunak was what's going to happen to the rump of the debt for lending to these businesses, particularly if they're not there when we come back. And secondly, the furlough situation, of course. You can't keep paying these people out of taxpayers' money forever. I can only assume that all this debt we're accumulating will be run off balance sheet. In other words, you'll do exactly what we did with the banks, which is why we've still got 62% of Royal Bank of Scotland. You don't have to crystallise that loan until you want to do it. So this could run on for generations, to be perfectly honest, a bit like war loan.
And that's the model, Mickey. The model is the bailout of the banks in the last economic crisis. And we may well see that a lot of the debt that companies incur, which the government is guaranteed, which doesn't get paid back. And remember, I think it was the Fitch credit agency this week said that it expects the major high street banks to lose £25 billion this year because of loans that will not be able to be repaid. You could well see the government taking equity stakes in businesses. We're back to that again. And then winding that debt down over the process of many years. But what's the alternative? The alternative is you have an enormous increase in unemployment and all the economic detriment that causes.
It just seems to me that, as Declan says, I am so glad not to be anywhere near being in government and having to make those decisions at the minute. But let me bring in Johnny Ratcliffe, who joins us now. Johnny is a businessman who runs offices.co.uk with 2 employees. And Jonathan applied for a bounce back loan earlier this week, and I think I'm right in saying got it. But Jonathan, what do you think? What do you think of what Anneliese has said? What do you think of what the guys are discussing? Small businesses, as she pointed out, aren't necessarily used to taking on debt and don't want to have to take on loans.
No, I mean, for me, I'd never ever consider taking on a business loan. I've always made my own money, proud of that. I'm independent, and I think that goes for a lot of small businesses. The proud people. Debt is not good. And yeah, I've basically this week taken on £28,000 worth of debt. I don't need it just at the minute, but I am hedging against the unknown. And honestly, I don't know what's coming. I have to put food on the table for the family. We just don't know. And a lot of the business people I know are taking this view now that, what's happened has just been amazing. From a real boom, everybody was really positive and gung-ho. There's big investment going on. The businesses I was involved in the office space industry, there's huge money was going into new buildings, new developments. And almost 2 weeks after that, we're facing just an absolute collapse of everything we knew. So you ask me now what I need to do to put food on the table, which is ultimately what it comes down to, and that is having some money in the bank that can access when my savings run out, which I presume they're going to fairly soon. So,
but you've got a situation, John, where basically you've taken out a loan. It will have to be paid back, and you've just seen, like any other business, a massive hole pumped into your cash flow. The money's not there. You're not going to get it back.
Well, I've got a number of problems that I wake up in the night with. So my turnover last year was 116,000. So that means I can apply for the bounce back loan of 28,000. There's other issues though, because there's VAT. So this the quarter just gone. I've just done that. My VAT bill's 4,000. I don't have to pay that till the end of the year. I've got my summer personal tax to pay, which was about 5,000 or 6,000. I don't have to pay that. So what I've done is, or what the government's allowed me to do, is kick this can down the road. Now,
But do you think your business is going to be the same when you come back? Because you're in the office business, and to be honest, one of the things about the lockdown is people aren't working in offices.
It's changed, hasn't it? I'm very small. This is quite a new venture for me. My company's been going longer, but this part of it is new. And I get paid a commission on putting people in flexible office space. Now, for me, I'm quite a positive person, but I see this as an opportunity for my business. Me being one person, I've taken on somebody yesterday. So in terms of my business, it's an opportunity. There's a guy made redundant who was very well thought after in the industry, and I can now hoover him up and employ him so that my business is set to try and grow through this. We will see. But I'm an entrepreneur, I look at the positives and the opportunities that are coming out of this. In the office space, people are moving around already, and that's an opportunity for me to get involved, to hoover up what the big boys are losing. I've got a low cost base, there's just me and this other guy, so we've got a good opportunity here for us.
Lifting the crumbs off the rich man's table.
If you like, yeah, why not?
But Johnny, what does the whole... Sorry, Mickey, to cut across. I just wondered what Johnny makes of the whole working from home trend that has now caught on. There are going to be businesses that look at this when the lockdown ends and say, actually, it works better for some of our employees. It saves us money on having to have offices. We're going to keep more people working from home.
So if I give you an example, I have a client in Leeds looking for an office for 30 people. They've got two choices. They can either take a lease on an office or they can go into a flexible office. So you look at the month is about £10,000 on each. Their commitment would be £120,000 a year times 5 on the leasehold. Now they're signing up for the whole commitment. Or if they go on a flexible, then they take an agreement for 12 months, but with 3 months' notice. So you can imagine the figures, the differences here. And you refer to people working from home, and the view is that actually some businesses where people want to work from home long term, that'll just be fine now. Everybody's Zooming, or we're used to working from home. We've got that system set up, and what we're going to see, we think, is office space either staying the same or moving slightly smaller, but there'll be this, I wouldn't describe it as hot desking, but a desk share scheme where 30% of your staff will work permanently in an office, and then this 70% will so you may have 3 days a week in the office and 2 days from home, or vice versa, and different teams will come in on different days. That's what we see.
Making sure the desk gets a good deep clean in between teams.
Well, I'm thinking that's the business to go into, cleaning now. Because there will be more cleaners in the office than there are personnel. I suppose that's the whole point of it, Jonathan, is that these things, people see it as a demise, but others see it as an opportunity.
Can I ask you to apply the back in business crystal ball to this and look at what are we going to look like? I mean, is this a permanent shift? Are we going to see a lot of unlet office space sitting empty for the next few years, the way we did after 2008 when offices closed down? Simon, what's the whole work environment going to look like?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of talk the work environment would change after 2008, and it really got back to a normal sort of mode. Although there was a growth in self-employment and freelancing, and obviously these work hubs grew up all over the place. Humans do like to get together. There's no doubt about it, and that social side is really important. But a lot of these futurologists have been talking about working from home and working alone and working online, and maybe that's all come a little bit closer after this pandemic.
Johnny, last word from you. You're the one in the office business. What's your crystal ball telling you?
I think short term, I think the nice to haves for freelancers and the self-employed who are working out of the expensive, nice co-working, I think will get hit. I think on the larger side, you'll see more regional offices, so large London institutions splitting staff across the country to reduce costs. That was already happening anyway. This just supercharges that decision. It's already happened, people working from home. And the medium, I think, will stay the same. You speak to people and people want to go back to the office. People are at home, they're not having that social interaction. The sales teams and other teams are struggling to communicate properly. You can have hours of Zoom conversations, but if you just want to ask a question, that's the problem. So overall, yeah, small, I think the co-working people will struggle, but they can flip those offices into private offices, which I think will increase. People going back to work will have to have 2 metre distances and private offices more so than huge open plan. I've read countless articles already saying this. So an open plan office can be divided up within a week. So yeah, they will struggle, but they will adapt, and companies adapt quickly to these things. So
I can see Mickey dialing his broker as we speak. Thinking about where he's going to make some money out of this.
And I can see his broker hanging up.
Yeah, he knows I'm skint. I mean, it's worth remembering, everybody, that 80% of the UK economy is made up of service companies. Service companies pitch for business, and then they fit within the cost range. So that's why they're very labour intensive. But of course, that varies from job to job, simply to enable them to make a profit. The good thing about service companies is they can adapt to new trends much better than a manufacturing company can. So yeah, a manufacturing company can switch from making widgets to respirators one week, but it can't keep doing it week in, week out to suit the economy. And that's the problem facing manufacturers.
Agile, they're not agile, Mickey, like you.
No, not like me.
Not like you.
Dumbo.
All right, look, before we go, let's get an update on government schemes and so on, what has been happening around the country. Declan, you've got your finger on that pulse. Can you bring us up to date?
Well, the money is flowing. UK Finance, which is the trade body for the banks, says they have now lent over £5.5 billion to small businesses using the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. The British Chamber of Commerce, though, says the money is still taking too long to arrive under those schemes. It's coming a lot quicker under the bounce back loans. There were 69,000 applications from the very smallest businesses on day one, and much of that money was paid into bank accounts as early as Tuesday, unless you were banking with Barclay. Some of its customers were complaining about problems with the website even as late as Thursday. Barclays has apologised and says that it is looking into what the hold-up is. There are issues with some applications for grants and loans in Northern Ireland, issues over how you verify that you are self-employed. Some of the more commonly used methods of verification there are not being recognised by the system. The local executive says they are looking into it. And there is one growth business that I spotted this week. Graham's Dairy, which supplies milk and butter to the supermarkets, says butter sales have doubled because we're all baking more bread at home. That has to be Mickey with his floury hands.
As it happens, my missus is in the kitchen next door cooking muffins and a lemon drizzle cake. Not for me, I hasten to add.
Well,
So,
and,
yeah,
and
it's
obviously
true.
we don't get to share it, so that was very kind of you to let us know what was.
I'll let you have a peek of it.
I didn't like the way Declan looked at me when he talked about Barclay. It's nothing to do with me. I'm just
For a change.
just to let you know.
Yeah.
And there we've got to go.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone, particularly the listeners. As Liz says, time to go. We'll be launching the first of our Q&A sessions next week. Look out for that. Keep an eye out for that. And on next week's podcast, we'll be talking about being self-employed in the current climate, which is obviously difficult, but then it applies to all of us as well.
And in the meantime, tell us your stories, your experiences, your thoughts. Email us at contactus@backinbusiness.org.uk. Visit the website, find us on LinkedIn, and we're on Twitter at business_backin. See you next week.